Hello, everybody, and welcome back to day 27 now of our Bible study in the book of Matthew. We are in Matthew 16. It starts out with the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to Jesus and, keyword, testing him, giving eye into the character of these people, testing Jesus, asking him to show them a sign from heaven. I realize that tested isn't necessarily a bad quality, but testing him with the frame of mind that they've got going on. Let's put it that way. Jesus replies, when evening comes, you say, it'll be fair weather, the sky is red, and in the morning today will be stormy because the sky is red and overcast. And his point being, you know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. And that's interesting to me. And I don't know, I dislike that verse because I'm a person that wants a sign. I'm a person that wants assurance. I'm a person that struggles, in faith and with doubt and wants assurance through that. But here Jesus says a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. And under the context, I would assume that means a generation that's worshiping other gods. And I think for a lot of us, there's not literal other worship of gods happening, but there's also talk about like what you give your time to, you are worshiping. And so like our phones, our entertainment is a lot of what a lot of people will talk about as worship. And maybe it's wrong of me, but it's hard for me to take that as seriously as I do what was happening here, which is much more of literal worship of other gods like Chemosh, like Ashtaroth, like Molech, where they're literally giving their children to be burned alive on a bronze statue while the child's still alive, burning to death. So it's hard for me to put those sins on the same playing field. Not to say they don't have value, but it's hard for me to compare. I'm spending this time on entertainment versus they were doing this as a means of worshiping other gods, if that makes sense. But I start to think about, I should finish. Jesus says no sign will be given it to this adulterous generation. No other sign will be given to it except for the sign of Jonah. And I guess it's not here, but in other places, I think it happened previously a couple chapters ago where Jesus described Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. The Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth, or the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, signifying his travel to Hades and conquering Hades. Now I forget where I was going to go. Oh yeah, so going back, I can't remember the name of the guy in the Old Testament, but where he wanted to seek a sign from God for assurance, and his story, I want to say it's Gideon, but I can't remember. His story goes, he's laying out like a fleece garment or a fleece blanket or something like that, and he says, okay, God, if this blanket out here catches the dew and in the morning I go out and there's dew on it, then I'll know that you're telling me the truth, or this is the way that you want me to go. And then it happens, and he's like, okay, let's do it again. I want to put the fleece back out there, and this time I want it to be dry the following morning, even though there's dew everywhere else, basically. And he goes and looks, and sure enough, it's dry, and he's like, okay, I believe you. This is the assurance that I needed, and now I know. And so it's like there's that example that doesn't seem to be condemned when let's say Gideon, I don't remember if that's the right character, is seeking this sign. So I don't know that this verse is completely I don't know if the meaning to what Jesus is saying is as simple as the surface level interpretation of the verse. There was something else I was going to say in the New Testament as well that's a similar example of this, but it's escaping me. I guess I'll move on because it's escaping me. Let's see. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Jesus says, be careful. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They discussed this among themselves and said, "It is because we didn't bring any bread." We're like, Jesus is upset with us and comparing us to the Pharisees and Sadducees because apparently the Pharisees and Sadducees don't bring bread. I don't understand. But that's the conclusion that they were coming to, probably just because Jesus said leaven, it seems like. And Jesus is surprised. He's like, "You of little faith, why are you..." It says Jesus aware of their discussion. Not necessarily that he heard it, but he was aware of it. Jesus says, "You of little faith, why are you talking amongst yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets full you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets full you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread?" He's like, look, you saw what I just did and what God did with what little food that you had for such a huge crowd, and you're worried about the fact you didn't bring bread. You're fine. We can provide bread for you. But let me continue. "But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread. Key word here, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I was going to take this time to go off and talk a little bit because it's just the way I felt like I should go. I didn't have a super standard upbringing in terms of the church that I was brought up in. The church that I was brought up in is essentially what I would describe and be convinced of as one of many modern day cults. And I'm not sure how much I want to get into that, but needless to say, it was a very different experience. And I have left that church for a while now, several years probably. And in the new church that I'm been going to for a while here with my wife, we've been going to Church of Christ's for probably 2 years or something. I've noticed that at certain churches, and even within like the ideologies of people close to me who are a part of the church, it's like they're very afraid about partaking of the bread and wine if the bread is leavened. They don't want it to be leavened. Don't want it to have any yeast in it. And it's like, it's a problem if it has yeast in it. And for me, I found a bunch of struggle internally with that, because I'm like, I don't think Jesus cares if you put some leaven in or yeast in your bread. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. And this verse might be a verse that somebody would bring up as a means of evidence towards saying, oh, you're not supposed to put leaven inside the bread you're taking for communion. And I just invite whoever thinks that way to look back a chapter or two where Jesus was talking about the kingdom of heaven is like a woman who was taking leaven and leavening her loaf, and it little leaven leavened the whole loaf. And I don't know what he meant by that, but here he's literally describing and comparing the kingdom of heaven to leaven being used inside bread making. I don't think Jesus cares that you put leaven inside the bread you're using for communion. And maybe there's evidence towards it, but I sure couldn't find it back then when I researched it more, and I can't find it now. If anything, I find more on the contrary now. I don't know if that was even worth me mentioning, but I just want to say, like, there's so much that people get bent out of shape on that I think God could care less about. You know, that is so much so they're missing the point of what was supposed to be happening. Kind of like the scribes and the Pharisees and Sadducees, where they're like the Pharisees, I believe, were tithing to the very, like, to the nth degree, where it's like even the herbs growing in their garden, they're weighing out to get a tenth for their tithing and stuff like that. But yet they completely missed the ball on the spirit that the law was trying to cultivate, loving your neighbor as yourself, and loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. I can't remember. I think it's only 3, but I did 4 there. You get the point. I think it's fruitless. It's fruitless to go through the motions within your faith without having the inward presence of God in your life, and the inward changing of the Holy Spirit working inward to the outward. I don't feel like I'm explaining that well. I'll just reiterate the example that Paul gave, one example that Paul gave, where he says, if I give my body to be burned alive and yet have no love or have no charity, it profits me nothing. And I take that as well as his other examples to mean, like, you can go through the motions and it can mean absolutely nothing to you. How many times have you seen people who are avid churchgoers and yet whose lives are secretly horridly messed up because they're focused so much on the outward appearance and that fake projection of Christianity versus the inward presence of the Holy Spirit, changing them from the inside out? And part of the reason that people are fake is because Christians aren't necessarily always safe places to confide in, safe places to be vulnerable with and to open up to. And so that's something we talked about at our small group. Me and my wife, we went to a small group yesterday, and like that fits right in with, we as Christians especially should be safe places to confide in. That doesn't mean that we don't give advice. That doesn't mean we don't have any critiques potentially, but it sure means that everything we do comes from a place of love and protection and yeah, just loving them with the love that God has for them, loving them like you love yourself. Love people. Well, I've rambled on here for overtime, and we have a fair amount of the chapter left to go, so I'll save that for tomorrow. I appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe and comment if you have any input or would like me to go into more depth on any other topic. I appreciate each of you that's watching and commenting. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. See you tomorrow.